Welcome. If you're here, it's because you want to improve your English while learning about one of history's most fascinating and controversial figures, Niccolò Machiavelli. By the end of this video, you will not only have a better understanding of his life and philosophy, but you will also boost your English skills along the way. So, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Now, let's begin our journey into the world of Machiavelli. To understand Niccolò Machiavelli, we first need to dive into the world he was born into. Renaissance Italy was not a unified country like modern Italy. Instead, it was a collection of city-states, constantly at war, vying for power, and engaging in complex political maneuvers. Florence, Machiavelli's birthplace, was one of the most influential republics of the time, yet it was also vulnerable to internal power struggles and external invasions. Born on May 3, 1469, in Florence, Machiavelli grew up during an era of political instability. Italy was a battlefield for powerful forces, including the Holy Roman Empire, France, Spain, and the Papal States. The Medici family, one of the wealthiest and most powerful dynasties in Italy, ruled Florence for much of the 15th century, until they were overthrown in 1494, leading to the establishment of a more republican form of government. This event would prove pivotal in shaping Machiavelli's career and his views on power. As a young man, Machiavelli witnessed firsthand the downfall of leaders, betrayals, and the constant shifting of alliances. The fragile balance of power was a game of survival, and only the shrewdest rulers managed to stay in control. It was in this environment that Machiavelli began to develop his ideas about leadership, politics, and human nature. But Machiavelli wasn't born into a noble family. Unlike many prominent figures of the Renaissance, he came from a modest background. His father, Bernardo, was a lawyer with moderate means, which allowed Niccolò to receive a solid education but not the privileges of the elite. He studied Latin, classical literature, and history, subjects that would later influence his political philosophy. By the time he entered public service in 1498, Florence had become a republic once again, after the fall of the infamous Dominican friar Girolamo Savonarola. The young Machiavelli, only 29 years old, was appointed as a diplomat and secretary of the Second Chancery, a role that placed him at the center of Florence's political machine. This position allowed him to interact with some of the most powerful figures of his time, including Pope Julius II, King Louis XII of France, and Cesare Borgia, a ruthless military leader who would leave a lasting impression on Machiavelli's thoughts about power. During his travels across Europe as a diplomat, Machiavelli observed the cunning strategies of rulers and generals. He took note of how power was gained, maintained, and lost. He learned that morality often took a backseat to ambition and survival. These lessons would later form the foundation of his most famous work, The Prince. But before we get to that, it's important to understand the downfall of the Florence Republic and Machiavelli's personal fall from grace. In 1512, the Medici family regained control of Florence with the help of Spanish forces. As a loyal servant of the Republic, Machiavelli was seen as a potential threat to the new rulers. He was dismissed from office, arrested, and even tortured on accusations of conspiracy against the Medici. Though he was eventually released, his political career was effectively over. Disgraced and exiled to his family's estate outside Florence, Machiavelli turned to writing. Stripped of power and influence, he channeled his frustrations and insights into works that would shape political thought for centuries to come. This was the world that forged Niccolò Machiavelli, a world of treachery, ambition, and constant power struggles. A world where ideals often crumbled under the weight of realpolitik. And it is within this world that Machiavelli crafted his timeless observations about leadership and human nature. Stay with us as we explore his rise, his writings, and the controversial legacy that continues to influence politics to this day. Don't forget to leave a comment. What do you think of Machiavelli so far? A victim of circumstance or a mastermind of political strategy? Let us know. Machiavelli's political career was one of ambition, intrigue, and ultimately exile. When he was appointed as a diplomat in 1498, Florence was in a precarious situation. The Medici had been overthrown, and the Republic was struggling to maintain stability amid internal factionalism and external threats. Machiavelli quickly proved himself as a skilled negotiator, traveling across Europe to represent Florence's interests. His keen understanding of diplomacy allowed him to navigate the treacherous waters of Italian politics, but his fate would always be tied to the fragile nature of Florentine power. One of his most notable experiences was his interaction with Cesare Borgia, the infamous son of Pope Alexander VI. Borgia was a ruthless and cunning leader who sought to unify Italy through military force and strategic alliances. Machiavelli was sent as an envoy to observe and negotiate with Borgia, and what he witnessed left a profound impact on his political philosophy. He admired Borgia's ability to use deception, force, and strategic alliances to achieve his goals, qualities that would later be reflected in the prince. However, despite his growing expertise, Machiavelli's fortunes were tied to the Republican government. In 1512, everything changed. The Medici, with the support of Spanish troops, retook Florence, dismantling the Republic and re-establishing their control. Machiavelli, as a prominent member of the previous government, was arrested, imprisoned, and subjected to torture. Though he denied any conspiracy against the Medici, his past affiliations made him a suspect. After his release, Machiavelli found himself politically ostracized. No longer able to serve in government, he retreated to his estate, where he devoted himself to writing. It was during this period of exile and disgrace that he produced some of his most influential works. Though he longed to return to public service, his reputation was tarnished, and the Medici never fully trusted him again. Machiavelli's rise and fall in the political world shaped his views on power, loyalty, and the brutal realities of governance. His experiences with figures like Cesare Borgia taught him that political success often required ruthlessness and pragmatism, rather than idealism. These lessons would form the core of The Prince, a book that would forever define his legacy. Exiled from political life, Machiavelli turned to writing, and it was during this time that he produced his most famous and controversial work, The Prince. Written in 1513 but published posthumously in 1532, The Prince is often regarded as a guidebook for rulers who wish to maintain power at all costs. Unlike the idealistic political theories of his time, Machiavelli presented a pragmatic and sometimes brutal approach to leadership. He argued that a successful ruler must be willing to use deception, manipulation, and even cruelty when necessary. He famously stated that it is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. According to Machiavelli, morality should be secondary to the preservation of power. A leader who tries to be virtuous at all times risks being overthrown by those who are willing to act ruthlessly. Machiavelli's observations were drawn from history, analyzing past rulers and their failures. His work became synonymous with realpolitik, the idea that politics should be based on practical and strategic considerations rather than ethical concerns. Machiavelli's name has become synonymous with deception, cunning, and ruthless political maneuvering. But is this interpretation accurate, or has history misunderstood his true intentions? In this chapter, we will explore how Machiavelli's ideas have been both misinterpreted and embraced, and how The Prince became one of the most controversial books in political history. One of the biggest misconceptions about Machiavelli is that he advocated for immorality and cruelty without restraint. However, a closer reading of The Prince reveals that Machiavelli was not necessarily promoting tyranny, but rather acknowledging the harsh realities of power. His work was written as a pragmatic guide for rulers in an era of political instability, where survival often depended on the ability to act decisively and sometimes ruthlessly. He argued that a leader should not seek cruelty for its own sake but should use it effectively when necessary to maintain order and stability. The term Machiavellianism has since been used to describe political strategies that prioritize manipulation, deceit, and self-interest. Over time, figures such as dictators, corporate leaders, and political operatives have been labeled as Machiavellian for their willingness to bend ethical rules in pursuit of power. However, this interpretation oversimplifies Machiavelli's philosophy. He did not advocate for endless deception or unchecked ambition. Rather, he suggested that leaders must balance fear and respect, knowing when to be ruthless and when to be merciful. Another important point to consider is Machiavelli's broader body of work. While The Prince is often cited as the defining text of Machiavellianism, his other writings, such as Discourses on Livy, reveal a more nuanced political thinker. In Discourses on Livy, Machiavelli praises republican government and civic virtue, suggesting that his ultimate vision for politics was not one of absolute tyranny, but of stability through strategic governance. He admired the Roman Republic and its ability to balance power among different political institutions, which stands in contrast to the more autocratic principles often attributed to him. Machiavelli's ideas have been interpreted in different ways depending on the time period and political context. During the Renaissance, his works were controversial but widely read by rulers seeking to navigate the volatile Italian political landscape. Later, during the Enlightenment, thinkers like Montesquieu and Rousseau criticized Machiavelli for what they saw as an endorsement of despotism. In the modern era, political scientists and historians continue to debate whether Machiavelli was a cynical advocate for authoritarianism or a realist providing practical advice for leaders. Pop culture has further shaped the image of Machiavelli as a symbol of cunning and manipulation. His name has appeared in literature, films, and even psychology, where Machiavellianism is recognized as a personality trait associated with strategic thinking, deception, and the pursuit of power. However, such interpretations often ignore the historical context in which Machiavelli wrote. His insights were meant for leaders in a time of political chaos, not as a universal guide for unethical behavior. Ultimately, whether Machiavelli was a misunderstood realist or a champion of ruthless politics depends on how one reads his works. Was he merely describing the world as it is, or was he advocating for a world ruled by cunning and force? The debate continues, making Machiavelli one of history's most enigmatic political thinkers. While The Prince is Machiavelli's most famous work, his intellectual contributions go far beyond this single book. To fully understand his political philosophy, one must also examine his other writings, particularly Discourses on Livy and The Art of War. These texts reveal a more complex and nuanced thinker, one who was deeply concerned with republican ideals, military strategy, and the role of the people in governance. Discourses on Livy is one of Machiavelli's most significant works, written between 1513 and 1517. Unlike The Prince, which focuses on the strategies of individual rulers, Discourses on Livy explores the structure and function of republics, using the Roman Republic as a model. Here, Machiavelli argues that a successful government must balance the interests of the people, the aristocracy, and the ruling class. He praises the Roman system for its checks and balances, emphasizing the importance of civic virtue and active political participation. In Discourses, Machiavelli makes a compelling case for republicanism, stating that the strength of a state lies in its people rather than in the will of a single ruler. He criticizes corruption and warns that power, when concentrated in the hands of a few, inevitably leads to tyranny. These ideas contrast sharply with the autocratic strategies outlined in The Prince, leading many scholars to argue that Machiavelli was not advocating for dictatorship but was instead offering a pragmatic approach to different political contexts. Another significant work, The Art of War, written in 1521, provides insight into Machiavelli's views on military power and national defense. In this book, he emphasizes the need for a strong, citizen-based army rather than reliance on mercenaries or foreign troops, which he saw as unreliable and dangerous. He believed that a state must always be prepared for war, as military strength is essential for maintaining political stability and independence. His argument that military power is a crucial element of governance reflects his broader philosophy that politics and war are inseparable. Machiavelli's historical writings also reveal his admiration for ancient Rome and its political structures. He believed that history provided valuable lessons for contemporary leaders and often used historical examples to illustrate his political theories. By studying past events, he argued, rulers and republics could avoid the mistakes of their predecessors and implement policies that would lead to long-term stability and prosperity. These works demonstrate that Machiavelli's political thought was not limited to the ruthless pragmatism of The Prince. Rather, he was a thinker deeply engaged in questions of governance, republicanism, and the balance of power. His vision extended beyond mere survival and dominance. He sought to understand what made states thrive and endure, Despite the widespread focus on The Prince, Machiavelli's broader writings reveal a thinker concerned with the stability and longevity of political institutions. While he recognized the necessity of pragmatism in leadership, he also valued republican principles and sought to create a framework for sustainable governance. His legacy, therefore, is far more complex than the Machiavellian stereotype suggests. Few political thinkers have left a legacy as complex and enduring as Niccolò Machiavelli. His works have influenced rulers, revolutionaries, and scholars for centuries, shaping modern political thought in ways he could never have imagined. Whether viewed as a realist, a cynic, or a misunderstood patriot, Machiavelli's ideas continue to spark debate, inspiring both admiration and condemnation. One of the most significant aspects of Machiavelli's legacy is his impact on modern political philosophy. His concept of realpolitik, the idea that politics should be guided by pragmatic and strategic considerations rather than moral ideals, laid the foundation for contemporary political realism. Thinkers such as Thomas Hobbes and Friedrich Nietzsche drew from Machiavelli's insights, developing theories of power and governance that continue to shape political discourse today. Machiavelli's influence extends beyond academia and into the real world of politics. Leaders from various ideological backgrounds have studied his works, using his principles to navigate the complexities of governance. Napoleon Bonaparte admired Machiavelli's understanding of power dynamics, and his military strategies reflected many of the lessons found in The Prince. In more recent history, political figures such as Henry Kissinger, Richard Nixon, and even modern corporate leaders have been linked to Machiavellian tactics, applying his strategies to diplomacy, governance, and business. Despite his undeniable influence, Machiavelli remains a deeply controversial figure. Some see him as an advocate for tyranny and deceit, pointing to passages in The Prince that seem to justify ruthless behavior. Others argue that he was merely describing the realities of power rather than endorsing them. His defenders suggest that Machiavelli was a pragmatist who sought to teach rulers how to maintain stability in an unpredictable world. Beyond politics, Machiavelli's ideas have permeated popular culture, literature, and psychology. His name has become synonymous with manipulation and cunning, often used to describe characters in fiction who use deceit to achieve their goals. From Shakespeare's plays to modern television shows like House of Cards, Machiavellian archetypes continue to captivate audiences. In psychology, the term Machiavellianism is even used to describe a personality trait associated with strategic manipulation and self-interest. However, reducing Machiavelli to a mere symbol of deception ignores the depth of his thought. His works reflect a deep understanding of history, human nature, and the mechanisms of power. He was not only a political strategist but also a historian, playwright, and philosopher who sought to understand how societies function and how leaders succeed or fail. Today, Machiavelli's legacy remains as relevant as ever. In an era of shifting global politics, power struggles, and ethical dilemmas, his writings continue to offer valuable insights. Whether in government, business, or international relations, Machiavelli's principles are still studied, debated, and applied. Ultimately, the question remains: was Machiavelli a cold-blooded manipulator or a realist who simply told the truth about politics? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere in between. His works challenge us to think critically about power, leadership, and the nature of governance, ensuring that his influence will endure for generations to come. Over 500 years after his death, Niccolò Machiavelli's ideas continue to shape modern politics, leadership, and strategy. But in today's world of democracy, diplomacy, and social media-driven politics, does his philosophy still hold relevance? Or have the times changed so drastically that Machiavelli's principles no longer apply? In many ways, Machiavelli's insights remain as useful as ever. In political strategy, his emphasis on power, pragmatism, and adaptability is still evident in the actions of world leaders. While modern governments often advocate for transparency and ethical governance, behind the scenes, the need for negotiation, strategic alliances, and sometimes even deception remains crucial. Political campaigns, for example, rely on messaging, persuasion, and strategic maneuvering to secure power, concepts that Machiavelli would recognize instantly. Beyond politics, Machiavelli's principles have found a place in business and corporate leadership. The cutthroat nature of competitive industries often rewards those who can outmaneuver their rivals, much like the rulers Machiavelli advised in The Prince. CEOs and executives must make difficult decisions that balance ethics, profit, and power, echoing Machiavelli's assertion that leaders must sometimes make unpopular choices to ensure long-term stability and success. Machiavelli's influence can also be seen in international relations. Nations act in their own interests, forming alliances when beneficial and withdrawing when necessary. The balance of power between countries, strategic diplomacy, and military deterrence all reflect the realpolitik approach that Machiavelli outlined centuries ago. His ideas continue to be studied in military academies and foreign policy schools, proving that his understanding of power dynamics remains invaluable. However, in an era where public opinion can be shaped instantly through social media, some aspects of Machiavelli's philosophy face challenges. The internet has created unprecedented levels of transparency, making it more difficult for leaders to rule through secrecy and manipulation without public scrutiny. In contrast to Machiavelli's time, where rulers could act behind closed doors, today's leaders are under constant watch, with their every move analyzed and debated by millions. This raises the question, can a leader truly be Machiavellian in the digital age, or must modern leadership evolve beyond his teachings? Despite these challenges, Machiavelli's core ideas about human nature remain strikingly relevant. His belief that people are motivated by self-interest, fear, and ambition is reflected in everything from political campaigns to corporate boardrooms. Even in personal relationships and workplace dynamics, his observations about power struggles and strategic thinking can be seen in everyday life. Machiavelli's writings serve as a reminder that leadership is rarely black and white. Effective leaders must navigate a complex web of ethics, ambition, and practicality. While some may reject his views as too cynical, others recognize them as an honest reflection of how power truly operates. As we look at the modern world, it is clear that Machiavelli's influence has not faded. His principles continue to guide politicians, business leaders, and strategists across the globe. While times have changed, the fundamental dynamics of power remain much the same, ensuring that Machiavelli's wisdom will continue to be studied for generations to come. So, what do you think? Are Machiavelli's ideas still relevant in today's world, or have we moved beyond his political philosophy? Let us know in the comments.